You all might get a notification. You might have to click yes to keep watching. Otherwise, yeah, it's thanks firstly Bob and Scott for joining us tonight. It's really happy to have both of you. And also Nev, this all actually was Nev's brainchild. He's the one who really has been pushing to get this since about September. This is about all you'll see from me tonight. I'm hopefully going to disappear and you'll never see me again. But otherwise, it'll generally just be a back and forth, a bunch of questions. I think, as Emma said, you could put questions as a Q&A section. We will try to get to them if we can. We're sort of focused on the questions that came through the online registration first, and also depends on how long it takes. But apart from that, I will disappear. And Nev, this is all in your hands now.
Excellent. I'm just asking Emma to keep an eye on the time for us in case we get deep into exciting conversations on contour lines and that sort of thing. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. As Patrick mentioned, watching Eco Challenge last year was especially cool, knowing that we've got two members of the Canadian adventure racing community that were on that show and did incredibly well. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for them to chat with us about their experiences in racing, not just in eco, but other big races around the world, their background in adventure racing and sport, and any advice, especially focused around navigation. Thank you to Don't Get Lost for hosting this, and for Patrick Sale, Emma Waddington for helping to organize this. Really appreciate it. I'm Nevin French, formerly in Ottawa, now in Toronto, and have been orienteering my entire life and doing the odd Raid the Hammer and adventure run and that sort of thing. And then I believe Bob was going to, or not Bob, Patrick was going to introduce our two guests here, but he's disappeared. So I'm going to ask the two of them. Actually, no, I'm going to put them on the spot. Scott, can you introduce Bob Miller? And we'll get Bob to introduce Scott, please.
Well, I probably don't need quite as much time with Bob because I'm sure everyone here is aware of who Bob is. But Bob has, is kind of probably one of the best adventure racers to ever come out of Canada from an athletic standpoint, but of course from a navigation standpoint, which is I think the main reason why everyone's here to listen to him tonight. But Bob and I have known each other for 20 odd years now. Did a few eco challenges on opposite teams, on opposing teams back in the early 2000s. So that's kind of when I really got to know Bob. And then we managed to join forces for a bit of racing back in 2006 and in that time frame, just before I started my family in 2008. And then I took a break, and Bob continued to accelerate and improve, and had some really good showings on the adventure racing world circuit. And continued to race right until he decided to have a family as well. And then yeah, we both joined forces again back in 2019 when Mark Burnett and the crew decided to bring back Eco Challenge in Fiji.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And Scott, you're in for everyone to know, you're in Collingwood, Ontario. Hometown is?
I was born in Mississauga, lived in Burlington up until a couple of months ago, and then yeah, I just wanted to get a little closer to Bobby, so I'm up in Collingwood.
Excellent. And Mr. Miller, please introduce your teammate who has crashed our party here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Scotty is pretty much a legend in adventure racing in Canada as well. I remember racing against him in a lot of the early Raid the North and Adventure Racing Canada races. And yeah, we were super pumped to team up. Finally, it took us a few years, and then we got on the same team and it just clicked. It was really good. But Scotty's background is paddling, thank God, because without him, we would have been definitely lost at Eco Challenge. He kept us straight and moving a lot of the time. But yeah, so Olympic caliber paddler, and I know he's done world dragon boat championships. I think maybe won a couple, that kind of a level of paddler. But then yeah, I got the bug like I did when the early ecos came out, and yeah, it's been awesome racing with him over the years, and it was amazing to team up again for this one.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Let's jump into this. Preparing for this, I reached out to both Eco director Kevin Hodder and Nathan Favre who won the whole thing, and both of them talked a lot in terms of the importance of navigation in adventure racing and in eco, and the critical element of that. And both of them mentioned the importance of thinking of that from the start. And so that we're going to kind of weave that throughout the questions tonight. But before we get going, this is, we've come out of 2020 and we're still in the middle of COVID, and just wondering if both of you can comment in terms of how you and your families have dealt with the pandemic, and just how much that's impacted everything. Certainly coming out of watching eco, I know so many people who just wanted to get out there and train and race right away, and life is just not letting us do fun things like that right now.
Yeah, I think it's been highs and lows for sure, good times and harder times. In general, my family and I, we have nothing to complain about. We're doing pretty well, and we're up here in Collingwood now, which is a pretty nice place to be. I would say personally, the biggest impact is when races get taken away. That's a bit of a change from what Bob and I are used to. But I would say kind of the nature of adventure racing is more about adventure and experiences, and a lot of the training that I do, and I think Bobby does too, is more about just getting out there and having fun. So once I've gotten my head past the point that I'm not training for a race anymore, and it's just been more about getting out there and enjoying things. And especially moving up to Collingwood here, it's definitely easy. There's lots of adventures to be had up here. So
I think did all three of us, I moved during this. Bob, did you move, or you just started massive renovations?
No, we moved as well. Isn't that funny? Yeah, that occupied, basically, with COVID, it gave me the time to make the move and do a big renovation. Otherwise I would have been organizing events. So COVID's been, like Scott said, up and down. We had one of the most amazing experiences during COVID. Our son was born, Keith, in May of last year. And we ended up deciding to have him at home because of there was an outbreak at the hospital and some crazy stuff. And then the midwife didn't arrive at our house in time, and I had to deliver the baby with my wife. So that was like next level, like one of the craziest things ever. It was just such an experience. So that was like a massive high, and it never would have happened otherwise. But I'm an event director as well, and all of our events have been taken away, and it's just bizarre. We're working really hard to bring them back, but there's so many unknowns with COVID. It's a bit of a struggle in that regard, but
I guess that's going into that, if you can give just an update in terms of like one of the most popular Ontario races is the Don't Get Lost Snowshoe Raid that you're the event director for. And the way nature works, the snow looks amazing, but what can you say on it?
Oh yeah, the same thing. We got really excited in the fall. We were able to host Raid the Hammer. It went off quite well, but it was kind of right at the beginning it was kind of right when the second wave was ramping up. So we got lucky that we could host that one. And then there was another 5K race that happened in the fall where they had like 900 participants over 2 days down near Orangeville. So that got me excited, and I was like, oh, we could do Snowshoe Raid, no problem. And then obviously lockdown in January, and it became obvious that we couldn't do it, and we won't be able to do it this winter. So yeah, it's really hard trying to plan. It's like really hard because no one knows what's going to happen. So
yeah, I think that's something, the clubs I'm involved in, the mantra is better safe than sorry in terms of adhering to guidelines and that sort of thing. But many people don't understand how long it takes to plan some of these events, that it's not something you can throw together, and you need that timeline to organize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's jump into this. I've got a bunch of really quick questions that you two can answer quickly here, and then we'll get into talking Fiji.
Who's going first?
Bob, you answer first, and Scott, you go next. What do you like better, cake or pie?
Pie.
Pie.
Driving standard or automatic?
Automatic.
Automatic.
Favorite types of biking: road, mountain bike, or cross?
Mountain.
Yeah, mountain. Even on road.
Skate or classic?
Both.
Skate.
Your favorite either pair of shoes or a piece of gear?
Too many shoes for all the different things. The one piece of gear I have that I've had since I started adventure racing is my Sunto Vector altimeter.
It's going to be a paddle, right, Scott?
Say again, yeah. My favorite pair of shoes is a paddle, and my favorite pair of shoes are probably my Hokas now. I like a good recovery old guy shoe when you need a soft day. And gear, yeah, I like my paddle for sure, but I like a good buff, hot weather, cold weather. It's always good to have a buff on your wrist.
Excellent. Most stylish adventure racer you race against or with?
Present company excluded, of course. Right?
Yes, of course.
Are there any stylish adventure racers? Maybe John Howard from back in the day. He was legendary.
It's a different kind of stylish. Wow, stylish adventure racer. Oh, Mike Closer, actually, he always looks pretty good.
Excellent. Best MacGyver adventure racer?
Ooh.
I don't remember the fella's name, but it was on a Canadian team at the World Champs in Costa Rica, and this team rebuilt a bike that got hit by a car. Like the whole thing was broken in two. So whoever that guy was, he's my best MacGyver.
Excellent.
I'll go with Steve Gurney. I think I remember hearing Steve Gurney like mixed up his own concoction of creams and stuff like that to put a boat together that broke in a mountain bike crash or something. No, he put together creams to like antifungal creams and stuff like that for races. So.
I'll go with John Marquez from the various stories I remember hearing about him.
He would be good.
Best professional sports athlete you'd pick to do an adventure race with?
Oh, I'm going to go local on that one. Scott Thornton lives up here near us, and we've become friends. And he's talked about Eco Challenge a lot, so I'd like to do one with him.
That's the former hockey player, Scott Thornton?
Yeah, Team Canada, NHLer,
yeah. Technically, Ryan Atkins is a professional athlete, so I'll go Ryan.
There we go. I would have gone with Sidney Crosby, but what non-adventure race have you always wanted to do? So something like a Boston Marathon or a big ski race or a big paddle race or something you've never done but you've always wanted to do.
Yeah, I like, wow, so many. Some of those mountain marathons in Europe or even the Alaska Wilderness Classic.
Yeah, I've got it on a short list to do the Yukon River Quest.
Ooh.
Old school paddling race for sure. And I've also been interested lately in Cape Epic mountain bike race. I keep hearing pretty awesome things about that.
Who on your team loves to train more than race, or who loves to race more than train?
Bobby. Oh, Bobby might be frozen, or else he's deep in thought.
Yeah.
I'll go first since Bobby's frozen. That's tough. I think we all love both, to be honest, but I think at our core, we're all racers and really enjoy the excitement of the race. So I think I would say we all race at the level we race at because we love to train. But at the end of the day, we would never give up the racing. The racing is it's fun, it's exciting. Especially, I think adventure racing is just the atmosphere you get out there is pretty awesome.
And so, I think we've got Bob back. Bob, if the camera is not working, just go sound.
I think I'm back.
Hey, you are back. Yep, there we go. Favorite post-race food or drink?
Fish and chips.
Ooh.
Whatever's hot and salty. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. I think when I start talking about food towards the end of the race, it's usually bacon and eggs, but I'm not picky after the finish line has been crossed.
Okay, second to last. What's the worst each of you have been lost?
Ooh, too many times to count. In all those early adventure races, lot.
Yeah. I'll tell a good story. We did back in the previous Fiji in 2002. We got into this one section. I was racing with Trish Westman, who a lot of people on the call probably know Trish. And we were heading up this valley, and Trish, for lack of description, I won't get into the detail, but she left a little marker on the trail. And we continued on after this, and we're racing for a couple of hours. And somehow we managed to turn ourselves around without even realizing it and came back to this same marker that Trish had left. And that was the only reason that we knew we had done a full loop. So that was back in the days. This is pre-Bob Miller, so that would never happen with Bob Miller on your team, of course. But I think that's the worst of everyone.
I'm sure no one will tell Trish that either.
No.
Bob, for you?
Getting lost? Jeez. I don't know. Probably, I can remember in a Raid the North race, up for hours and hours all through the night. Yeah, that was a lot of our early races in Ontario.
I remember actually racing against the Scott Ford in a Ottawa adventure run that you and your teammate were both faster, and you kept passing us like crazy and dropping us. And then we were like, oh my God, we'll never see them again. And then not too long later, it's like, hey, it's a Scott Ford again. Did that a few times.
You are probably not unique in having a story like that, Nevin. It's pretty Scott Ford signature.
Last question, teammate. Do you like the mature and experienced, or young, tough, and fast?
Experience always.
Yeah, I would agree, definitely.
Okay. Talking a bit eco, I reached out to the famous Wayne Leake, who I believe is with us on the chat here. And he talked about building, if you were to build an AR team in a lab, you'd take an experienced paddler, two of the fittest endurance athletes, and lead them with a world-class navigator, ensuring that they're incredible athletes and have a mature professional approach. And that was why your team did so well. Can you talk a bit in terms of the process of putting the team together and how much does personality matter versus just everyone's sheer physical skills?
You want to go, Scotty?
Oh, you go ahead, buddy.
I mean, Scott and I were in from the beginning for this team. And then I think we had Wayne on board next. Ryan was a bit on the fence for a while. I mean, his profession is obstacle course racing. So, you know, he had a lot to think about. There were some big races shortly after Eco Challenge where he would earn, you know, decent prize purses potentially. So he took a while to come around to the idea. But I mean, he's always wanted to do an event like that. So he was in, but it was kind of dependent on a lot of things that the race could do. And then the girl was hard for our team. We actually tested out another girl and it didn't work out. And then Ryan suggested Ray and we did a training camp. And yeah, I mean, she had the right attitude for sure, but she was lacking a lot of the skills for sure. So it was a wild card shot, but they also were very strict on when we had to have our teams figured out. And it was like early in the year of 2019. So we were kind of under the gun, which wasn't ideal. But yeah, that's basically how the team came together.
Bit of background in terms of how each of you guys got into the sport, and when did you start doing navigation-based sports as well?
I can go first on when I got in. It's been mentioned, I came from a paddling background, and back in 1998, the first Raid the North race up in Fort Collonges, Quebec, a friend of mine from paddling actually had a team in there, and he was looking for a female, which was not me, but looking for a female to round out his team, and I was coaching a crew of women at the time. So I suggested one of my paddlers to go on his team and said that it sounded interesting, and if he ever needed a guy to fill in to let me know. And literally, as luck would have it for me, not for the other guy, but one of his teammates got injured in his training, so I filled in for that first race back in '98. And yeah, I mean, things kind of came together quickly, and I was very lucky in that by 2 years later in Borneo, I was in my first eco challenge, and from there, it's history.
And Bob, what about you? And how did you gravitate towards being the navigator in these races?
Early on, it was by default. I remember my first race. It was an Adventure Racing Canada, their first race they ever hosted in Halliburton. I think it was in '98 as well. The sport was really picking up back then with Eco Challenge coming on television and everyone getting excited. But I read a navigation manual like the night before the race was the amount of training we did on navigation for that event. So but it was a lot of trial and error, the navigation, just learning from a lot of mistakes. But in that race, I raced with a lot of people will know Leanne Mueller. She was my first adventure racing teammate, and another friend of mine. We raced together in our learned race.
Excellent. So I guess question going into Fiji, a couple people asked, what did you learn from racing in Fiji in the 2002 Eco, and how did that allow you to prep for this last one?
I think we're probably going to have the same answer on this one. Feet. Both of our teams dropped out the last one because our feet got so trashed by this weird jungle foot rot they had in Fiji. And you saw a lot of teams suffering with the same ailment in this last edition. The Japanese team that was, what were they, crawling or getting wheelbarrowed to the helicopter to get off from above the falls? I mean, that was where most people contracted the foot fungus last time. So foot care was huge. That was the biggest thing I learned from that race.
Yeah, I would. So as Bob said, we hit the same answer on this one for sure. But just in general, I think coming at the race with a bit more experience, just self-care in general. Definitely feet were critical in Fiji, given the wet conditions and this fungus that seems to be everywhere there. But we were super careful with just making sure we took care of each other and took care of ourselves throughout the race, just to make sure we were racing strong all the way through. Yeah, and it definitely paid off. We came out of it, collectively. I think we had like 1 or 2 blisters on the entire team, and
Wow.
Overall, everyone was in pretty good shape at the end. And that's just experience, really.
So Fiji and Eco, Kevin Hodder, the event director, said, at risk of hyperbole, Bob's navigation was absolutely incredible. Simply taking on the challenge of navigating a team across an entire 672-kilometer Eco course is an amazing achievement. To do this on a level that lands your team on the podium is a supreme accomplishment. So Bob, how was your nav in Fiji? Were you happy with it? At the end of the day, are there parts that you look back and say, God, how did I, if only we had done this slightly different? But on a whole, on a race that long, how do you look back on that experience as a navigator?
Don't say anything, Scotty. My nav was perfect. No, they didn't. I don't know. We did quite well on the nav, but they didn't show a few of our pretty big mistakes. Later in the race, on the second last night, we were quite close to the Kiwis, and we made 2 mistakes. One cost us about an hour, and the other one was like a 4 or 5 hour, like really bad mistake. And I think it was a little bit of luck. that we couldn't find this trail. We were trying to locate a trail that they told us about, and we had a grid reference for in the dark, and we just kept trying trail after trail, and it didn't go the right way. And then we ended up trying to bushwhack, and it just became heinous. It was this tall grass, and then we tried to go up to a ridge, and we figured we could move along the ridge, and it was just even worse. So that we had to go all the way back to this. I would love to see our GPS track from that section. But yeah, it was hard. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things about Eco is, of course, they showed some navigational mistakes and didn't show others. And one of the ones that was on TV early on is Team Out There made a critical mistake early on going down. I think they went down the wrong tributary of a river on the paddleboard section. That was really early in the race. On a multi-day event like that, Bob, do you play it safe early on, or is it kind of full speed ahead the whole time? And you know, do you take factors like that into consideration?
So we actually saw Mike's team going the wrong way when we left that TA. I don't know if you remember, Scott. Remember there was a team paddling up the coast, and we had taken a bearing, and I could totally see how they made that mistake. I remember when we were preparing the maps to leave that transition, I couldn't figure out where we were on the coast because they'd given us a new set of maps, and it was different than the last set of maps. So it was confusing. So I can totally see how they made that mistake. And then I had to take a bearing. It was in the dark, and it was very foggy across a bay, and you couldn't really see where you were going. So we were just relying on a bearing on these stand-up paddle boards to get to the mouth. So it was a challenge for sure. But yeah.
I will say, this is a comment from a very average navigator. I'm not a strong navigator. I'm not the person who you're going to be coming to for that. But what I will say that Bob is exceptional at, he's obviously an exceptional navigator, but part of being an exceptional navigator is catching your mistakes immediately or very, very early on. And so even though that decision that Mike's team made was an easy one to make, they continued up that river for hours. I can't remember what the number was, but they kept going and going, and they were actually riding the tide up the river. So it was a very, very costly mistake. But what I will say Bob is really good at is, you know, if he does make decisions that aren't the right ones, he's very, very quick to catch them. And I think that kind of speaks to his, he's always on, like he's always navigating, even on areas where someone else might shut it down. And my guess is that Mike made this decision and he said, this is the river we want to go up. We're on a river. How can we possibly make a wrong turn? And I'm sure they just kind of kept, to some extent, paddling up this river without thinking about it until they realized they were going in the completely wrong direction.
Bob, on that, like when you, well, a couple things. We had a question in terms of the quality of maps this year, for this race. And we'll get to maps later, but just how did you find the quality of, and I know that that's part of the challenge of the sport is you got to use what they give you. But how did you find what they gave you this time?
Well, being accustomed to our Canadian 1 to 50,000 topos that are notoriously ambiguous, they're on par with those, I would say. The terrain there is insane. Like the number of small valleys and reentrants, like the maps just look like insane spaghetti. Like they're crazy, their maps. So but they're drawn to a very good standard, probably a similar standard to what ours were drawn to. Like they're 1 to 50,000 with, I forget what the contour interval is, but they're decent maps. They're not like garbage, like you can't use them. They're quite good.
Again, coming from the non-navigator on the team, I think one of the biggest challenges in Fiji was historically and even present day, one of the main means of transportation around Fiji between villages is foot on trails. And there are an overabundance of trails that are, some of them are marked on these maps, but the vast majority are not. So following trails can be especially dangerous down there. And that one night when Bob was saying we got turned around for 4 hours or so, we came down into this one valley and it was literally like this junction of about, I don't know, 7 or 8 different trails just kind of came together. And so trying to figure out which was the one that you wanted and which was heading on the right bearing that you wanted was, to say that was challenging was an understatement. And that kind of continued on throughout the race.
Bob, how do you, in terms of trails, like for someone looking at getting into the sport, trails are that's the easiest thing. But in orienteering, you sometimes say, well, trails can change. Trails may not be on the map. How do you kind of balance what you see there in the terrain versus what you have in your hand on the map?
It's tough. I mean, we get a lot of logging roads and things that aren't on the maps, all sorts of things where once you've been bushwhacking for a while, you're so happy to have that reprieve because bushwhacking is quite tough. But I mean, the general rule I used to use was like, if it's more than, 20 degrees off my bearing, I'm going to, get back on my bearing and not let it pull me off too far. Cause that's often what happens. You get on the trail, it's going a bit further off your bearing, a bit further off your bearing. And then before you know it, you've lost track of where you are. Whereas if you're on a bearing, you pretty much know exactly you're on this line and it's going to take you where you're trying to go. So trails are a blessing and a curse at the same time.
How do you find the navigation on the different modes of transportation that you guys have to deal with, like navigating stand-up paddleboard, navigating on bike, navigating on foot? Do you adjust your system to that? And how do you stay on the ball during that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely adjustments. Kind of the key is, and Scott touched on this earlier, you always want to know where you are on the map. It's super easy, especially in a 6 to 10 day race, to take a break and stop thinking about it for a while. If you're on something that's perceived as simple, and this happened in Eco Challenge, we were on a reservoir, and a lot of they showed it a little bit in the coverage, but we're paddling along the reservoir. Everything looks super easy, and you're just going straight to the end, and everything's good. And then all of a sudden, the reservoir ends way before it's supposed to, and then you're in these little creeks. Well, the reservoir had dropped I want to say 50 feet or something like that, and all these creeks, they were just going up re-entrance that normally would have been underwater when the map was made. So we got incredibly lucky that the sun was just going down and I could see 3 peaks off in the distance, and we kind of took a bit of a gamble, and I was like, I'm pretty sure those are those peaks. Let's take our bearing and just start hoofing it across the landscape, when we fully expected to paddle right to the next checkpoint. So always making sure you know where you are is super key. And then how that changes between the different disciplines, there definitely are different strategies when you're paddling versus mountain biking versus trekking. Like mountain biking, you have your bike computer, so that helps a lot. On the water, you can use big bearings, but often you can see a lot on the water. You can see for miles and miles, so that helps keep you on track. And then trekking is usually the hardest because there's so many different things that can throw you off on a trekking stage. So you're really focusing on maintaining your position on the map when you're going through that terrain.
A type of navigation that is incredibly hard is doing it as night navigation.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we'll kind of get into, some of the navigation when you're fresh during the day, going slowly, will be a piece of cake. How do you adjust for night? And this was something Kevin Hodder mentioned, that is an area that not enough teams practice, is the changes at night.
It's true. And we see it in wilderness traverse, all exactly the same. Like probably not only night navigation, but trekking at night is the hardest thing you'll do from a navigation perspective in these races, just because you can't see anything. And when you're off trail, you lose all sense of landmarks and everything. So basically you're relying on your compass bearing, or you're trying to read features, which is a lot harder in the dark. Altimeters help to a degree, especially if you're in mountainous terrain. But that's the hardest one. So the keys for navigating at night in the dark, the first thing I always tell people is to work with very obvious features. So don't try and take a bearing to a very small feature on the map. In Ontario, we would shoot for large bodies of water or pick a feature that's very obvious, a very big obvious hill or something like that. So make sure you're working with very obvious features. And then the critical other tip is you never go as far as you think you've gone. Like, you're always a lot slower in the dark than you're anticipating, and teams and people always stop short and think they've gone too far, and then they start making all these decisions based on that incorrect information and incorrect decision.
So, question in terms of Scott and your role in navigation. Wayne Leake referred to you as the senator. And we did see some teams on camera, which made for very good TV, disagreeing with navigation and, you know, some pushback and where are we going and this sort of thing. How do you guys deal with team dynamics like that? And mention Wayne referring to Scott as a senator, but someone who could be to kind of help when needed on some of the navigation. So just discuss kind of the team dynamics and Bob, what you look for from your teammates in terms of the navigation element.
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes back to Bobby and I both choosing the experienced racer over the young, fast one. And then one of the things you learn through experience, or most people learn through experience, is that conflict and picking at each other is completely counterproductive to achieving what everyone's goal is out there, which is to be as fast as possible and get to the finish as quickly as you can. And, you know, it's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to do. You get tired to an extreme. You're hungry. You know, there's definitely points in the race when there's other things you'd rather be doing. And so when things do start to fall apart, it's easy to pick. But yeah, our team, I would say, you know, to toot our own horns, we were pretty exceptional at staying positive and helping each other out. So we did, just like other teams, we had lots of high points, but also some low points. And I don't think, Bobby, correct me if I'm forgetting something, but I don't think there was any point in the race where we were, you know, questioning each other in a bad way, dragging each other down. It was always looking for ways to make people faster and build people up. And it's not even waiting until you get to a point when you need to do that, right? It's being proactive about keeping everyone moving as quickly as we can.
Yeah, like for Bob, for your other athletes and the other skills, like if there's a mechanical issue or someone's got a blister, the rest of the team can kind of work together to make up for that. If the terrain's not working with the map and you expect the checkpoint to be right there and it's not, what can they do to help you?
I mean, Scott's not giving himself enough credit on the navigation side. The way it worked in Eco Challenge was we would get a new set of maps and a guidebook for each leg of each camp for the next section of the race. So Scott and I would take the guidebook and the maps and go through the next section reading. He would read and I would try and transpose, and then we would look things over and pick the fastest route and kind of as quickly as we could discuss what we were going to do. And then when we experienced some challenges in the field, we for sure, you know, I would show them on the map what was going on and we would try and decipher what was happening. But, you know, when things aren't going well, I mean, you have to try and make a somewhat quick decision and then, you know, see where that takes you. And then, you know, if it was the right one to get you back on track, great. If it was the wrong one, okay, well, what's our next choice? And, you know, humming and hawing about it and arguing about it doesn't really get you anywhere. So I've seen this a lot in races where if you just make a decision quickly and try it out, you know, you find out what happens pretty quick. It's hard having teammates because when you are lost, you feel bad and, you know, you want help. But at the end of the day, you just got to keep trying different things and figuring it out. It's a puzzle and you just got to keep trying different things. And the speed that you kind of correct your mistakes is just as important as identifying them.
Do you guys ever, I know some teams will share the navigation a bit, like if they go onto a section that's quite easy, to allow the lead navigator to have a mental break, they may hand the map over for a bit. Have you guys ever experimented with that or seen teams that works on?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. To be honest, I don't think there was more than maybe 20 minutes or half an hour where Bobby wasn't in shape to navigate in Fiji. There were definitely some times during that one night where we got twisted around, where I bounced some ideas off him. I would say more than anything, I was a bit of a sounding board and suggested some ideas, and some of them sat well and some of them didn't. But sometimes I think when you get to the point of just complete exhaustion as a navigator, it's just nice to have a second set of eyes just to look for different things sometimes. But there have been times in the past, and Bobby's probably blocked them out of his memory, but where he has gotten to a point where he literally needs to shut it down, and he'll hand me the map. It's usually while we're sleeping, but even when we're moving, there's been times when I've navigated a little bit. And yeah, it's a completely, and I talk about Bobby being always on when he navigates, and he is, and that's a pretty tough thing to expect out of anybody for 6 to 8 days, whatever these races are.
One of my favorite parts of Raid the Hammer is the matrix, when teams can split up, and the teams with more than one navigators, you can really see the difference. And it's cool that those teams can really kind of move through the field, and teams in which it's been one person doing everything suddenly by themselves is much less fun.
Yeah, those are probably the most stressful racing moments I can remember, are matrix sections, when I'm given, I usually get the mediocre ones. and yeah, that's the worst feeling, is the fear of letting down your teammates.
Question in terms of what was the absolute toughest challenging section of Fiji? And the person asked in terms of the river section, which certainly on TV just went on and on and on. What did you guys find the absolute toughest part?
Go ahead, Bobby.
You go.
Yeah, I mean, that section was not understated. That first of all, leading into it, we had a pretty tough river scramble getting up to the bottom of the ascent up the ropes. It basically was started on a rocky riverbed, and the rocks got bigger and bigger until they were literally, some of them were the size of a small house. And so you're working through that for several hours up to the bottom of the waterfall. And then the ascent up the waterfall was, well over 1,000 feet. So it took its toll. And then, yeah, we got spit out into this river at the top, literally like a thick bamboo grass on both sides of this river. So you didn't have any choice except to swim down it. And the water, to say it was cold is a bit of an understatement, which is a strange thing to encounter in a tropical island. But yeah, I've heard, 10, 11 degrees was what the temperature of the water was. And it was about, on the map, it was about this far, it was about 8 kilometers, which doesn't seem like much, but the going was very, very slow. And when you could walk on these rocks that were underwater, they were covered in literally like a centimeter thick yellow slime. And it was just this greasy, peanut buttery mess. And so when you were walking, you kind of wished you were swimming, because you kept falling and slamming your shins and other various parts into rocks. And when you were swimming, you wish you were out of it because you were shivering. So
how was the waterfall climb? Because that was, of course, the television looked awesome and all that.
It was pretty epic. It was,
okay.
I love that part of a race. And, if you have your ascending gear dialed, it makes it many, many times easier. If you're not set up properly, then it's exhausting. But again, through experience, you get your gear set properly, and then it was a really fun section of the race. It's kind of,
and actually, Kevin Hodder, the race designer or course event director for Eco, in the chat, if you take a look, he's just posted a link for an article describing designing that fun section of the race.
Yeah, I actually read that article that he just posted, and it's a very well written. I remember reposting it and saying it was, it kind of really talks about a lot of the challenges. If I remember correctly, it talks a lot about trying to design a challenging course for, like a professional level athlete, right down to a weekend warrior. And you put these two people, which adventure racing is kind of unique in that way, onto the same course. And yeah, trying to challenge but make it doable for both athletes is you can imagine quite the.
That's a great segue into actually, Bob, your race, Wilderness Traverse. How did you get into designing races yourself? And what do you think about when you're designing that?
So we were lucky in Ontario and Canada, like in the late 90s and early 2000s. There were a few race series, Adventure Racing Canada and Raid the North. There's another one called Outlast. But some of the guys that were organizing those events, especially the Raid the North races with Dave Zietsma and Lawrence Foster and those guys, they set the bar really high as far as a challenging navigation course. And that's where I cut my teeth on learning to navigate. But I was lucky. I got to know those guys, and I got to start designing courses, and I learned from them and some of the mistakes that they made. But it's tough setting a course. I mean, the mistake that almost all first-time course setters make is they make the course too long, and they underestimate how long it's going to take teams to go through. But the thing that amazes me, even all these years I've been organizing the event, teams always go somewhere I never think they're going to go. It's awesome. It's crazy.
That's interesting. When you do your orienteering officials clinic, they warn you in terms of, this is what the best route is. Yeah. Don't think that everyone's going to be doing that at all. No. Let's a few more some navigation questions. Bob, how did you learn how to navigate? Were you taking clinics? Were there races that you started to go in to work on improving this?
A lot of trial and error. I didn't take any clinics. I read some books, and then just did a lot of races. In those early years, I was probably doing like 6 to 10 races a year, like adventure races, and then as many orienteering events as I could fit in as well. So just tons of races.
For those early orienteering races, how did you find those? Like, I know a lot of adventure racers come to an orienteering race and they kind of take a look at some of the mature athletes saying, oh, I'm going to destroy them. And then they look at the results later and they're quite a ways back. How did you, and going into orienteering, which is pure navigation, how did you find those as kind of challenging in a different way?
Yeah. And you were talking about adventure racer style early on. How about orienteer style? That's next level. That's pretty awesome. But it was completely different. I made a whole bunch of mistakes. I couldn't figure out the symbols on the maps because I came from the 1 to 50,000 topos. And I knew I'd looked at the legends before races, but I would always default to the 1 to 50,000 topo legend. And, when it was white, I would assume there to be a field and I'd be running around in a forest, couldn't figure out where I was. So I made all those mistakes.
Did you find that doing that orienteering made a big difference in terms of your adventure racing navigating?
Absolutely. And it's not uncommon to get an orienteering section in an adventure race these days. Eco Challenge is a different animal because the courses are typically quite remote and in these amazing countries, and the cultural experience is just as important as the racing experience. It's something different than you'll see probably in a lot of the Adventure Racing World Series events now, where they've really, they're hosting them in not as remote places sometimes, and not always, but sometimes. And to give you the adventure, they'll bring in these super technical sections of orienteering and other things, which it's a different type of challenge. So I had to learn orienteering.
And I imagine that, when I first started hearing about adventure racing, one of the things we heard was the maps were super dodgy. And controls or checkpoints may be a little off, but that was quote unquote part of the adventure. Have you noticed the technical element of adventure racing really changing lately?
Yeah, I think you still get the dodgy maps, but I think the checkpoint placement has improved dramatically. It's not often that you get a misplaced checkpoint in an event anymore. I can't remember the last time something
That's
like that.
that's
But
something in terms of orienteering. Like the quality control is certainly, if it's once in an absolute blue moon, you'll get it in the wrong spot, but tend to be pretty precise on that.
yeah, and I think they're getting better in adventure racing now. I mean, back in the day, you're right, there were definitely some issues that happened, but yeah.
And you mentioned kind of some of the complex area. Have either of you guys done any urban sprint orienteering at all? And one of the things, like I'm living in downtown Toronto now, and we'll have people on the chat who live in cities. Is there ways to like navigating? Have you guys done technical navigating in cities that aren't just out in the wilderness?
I haven't actually participating in a sprint race, but I've seen the maps on what's the orienteering days of Christmas? What's that one called?
I think you've stumped me. Days of Christmas.
Well, they do like a different orienteering map
Uh,
every day from a
World. I think that's World of World of Orienteering. Yes, I've
yeah.
heard of that. So
But anyways, I've seen the maps there, and they're just like crazy. All the little features and things you'd have to figure out at a really high speed. It would be so hard. I'd be completely lost in one of those events. I can tell you right now.
actually, and that's leading on in terms of when you're navigating. Like orienteers talk about a navigating speed and a running speed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to control the Scott Fords on your team who may want to absolutely hammer when you can only navigate at a certain speed?
Actually, that's one thing I was really worried about going into Eco Challenge with Ryan because of he's I think a better athlete than both Scott and I. I don't know, Scott, maybe what do you think? But his pacing was really, really good. Like he knew we were out there for that many days, and I was like, after the first or second day, I was like, okay, this is great. He totally understands pacing over this many days. So, but that's my goal, is to be able to navigate and not slow the team down when I'm training and preparing. I'm like, I got to be able to move at the same speed and not have to slow them down.
What are some races that, if people are on this chat and are looking to get into it, what are some good races they should think about trying out? Be it individual or in a teams. Are there any? It could be in Ontario or elsewhere in Canada that you think would be a really good one to jump into.
There's lots of good ones. I mean, any orienteering club, even their training events, if you can find the team ones, like the Raid the Hammers and the Raid series that Don't Get Lost hosts. I think I did the first or second one back in like 98 or 99. Those were great because they bring the team aspect to the navigation as well. And then there's a whole bunch of adventure races in Ontario. We're actually quite lucky to have, a decent number of events to participate in. But yeah, I mean, basically when you're starting out, the more experience you can get, the better, because there's just so much to learn with this sport. You actually have to invest the time to really get rewarded with the experiences. And there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be failures, but the best adventure racers, they accept that and they move on and they improve. It's a total key to this sport.
Yeah, I would echo that. Don't be afraid to just get out there and try. Lots of orienteering. I'm seeing in the chat, there's mention of these virtual events going on right now and around the Golden Horseshoe, which are a great opportunity. I would also say you'd be hard pressed to find a more welcoming community than the orienteering community and the adventure racing community for that matter. So feel free to reach out to anyone, to these organizations, and be more than happy to point you in the right direction.
And of course, Wilderness Traverse is one that that, like, Bob, and when you design this, you're designing a course for both the elite teams and for others as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other thing that blows people away is how fast the fast teams can move, especially when they're new to the sport. They just, they can't believe it. So, we bill it as a 24 to 30-hour race, but typically the first team's done in about 18 to 20 hours. And then we need that extra 10 to 12 hours for all the rest of the teams to have a chance of finishing. It's amazing how quickly you can lose time in these events when things don't go perfectly. So,
And I think one of the cool things, like in Raid the Hammer, hopefully you guys are hopefully there's gonna be a normal Raid the Hammer in 2021. But if possible, are you guys looking at doing that? Because then, literally anyone can challenge you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Ashley and Kevin Hodder just mentioned the Swamp Donkey Adventure Race in Manitoba, and I wanted to reference that team. I think it's True Blue, and on the show you saw them leading a whole bunch of other teams out of a tricky section near the end of the race. Did you guys have any trouble in that section?
Yeah, True North. That was where we made our big mistakes, I think. When I watched the coverage, I was pretty sure that's where we made our big mistakes. They were trying to get through these valleys. And it was just tricky to find the right trails to get out of these valleys. And I think that's what happened there. And yeah, Team True North was leading a bunch of teams through, which was really cool.
Yeah, it was very awesome to see that. It was a little conga line of lost teams being led out by Alex Mann, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys? What was the sense of the Canadian community there at Fiji?
It was really good. I mean, the community amongst all of the teams was it's amazing, really. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's a race, but it's also this like unbelievable challenge. And for the most part, we're there to race and to try and get on the podium, but the first 5 days, everyone's just trying to survive and stay relevant and not make mistakes. So if you get caught up too much in the racing early on, it takes away from the experience of all these like-minded people that have come from all over the world to participate. So yeah, the community amongst the Canadian teams was great. We talked to all of them afterwards and before, and yeah, there was great camaraderie, and yeah, it was cool.
So a couple last questions, then we'll get into more of the Q&As there. What kind of hours were you guys cranking out training for Fiji? And how did you kind of split up that training hours over different disciplines?
I think we're all fairly similar in our hours, so I can maybe answer that one. We all have different life situations that we got to squeeze those hours into. But I would say in general, we all kind of build up to probably 15 to 20 plus hour training weeks. And then we do try and get together as a team, or we got together as a team a couple of times for bigger weekends where we would do, some overnight training or some couple of big 12-hour days or something like that. But yeah, I would say in general, I would say in around 20 hours is what I would peak at from a training standpoint.
And actually that leads me into the next question. You guys now have families, and how does having spouses and kids impact training and racing and traveling and all that sort of thing?
Time management.
And supportive families too. It's decisions to race and decisions to train are not made solely by myself. It's a family discussion, and when before I decided to do eco, it was a big real conversation with my wife, and the reality of what training looked like, and then just leaving to go to Fiji for 3 weeks is a big commitment as well. So it's a conversation for sure.
And Bob, your spouse is a great athlete as well. Is that something that you've really been able to train with Shannon, and how's that improved your racing?
Well, we used to do quite a bit of training together. Now we're longing for the days when that'll happen again. Actually, we got to go and do a race out east, the Rogaine that they host out there every spring.
That's in
My
Nova
wife and I,
Scotia, yes.
yeah, we went in the spring of 2019 for training. But I mean, it's amazing to have a spouse who also participates in these events, because she understands the time that's required. So that's good, but we're also both trying to find the time, which poses the challenge. So yeah.
Actually, speaking of kids, Don't Get Lost as their adventure running kids program. Scott, I think you were involved a little bit before you moved north. What was it like seeing all those kids running around in the mud and that sort of thing, and kind of next generations of adventure racers?
It's fantastic. I mean, as great as it is to see a group of adults out doing an orienteering race like Raid the Hammer, there's nothing better than 3 of my 4 kids have been old enough to partake, and kids just love being out in the woods, right? And it takes the concept of fun running to the next level, and that they're just out there having fun in the woods, getting dirty, and yeah, no, it's a fantastic program for sure.
Excellent. Last question, and then I'll go for some of the questions that we had sent in here. Thanks for everyone for hanging out a bit longer. The last question, which asked a bunch of people, what do you guys know about the status of ECO 2021? And if Kevin, you're listening in on the chat, you're welcome to give us any intel. But for you guys, what's both that focus, and then 2021 race plans as best you know?
Yeah, so I think with Eco Challenge right now, they're searching for a new television partner. Amazon is not interested in showing another set of race or another race. I think the race did pretty well. I think the TV coverage got pretty high viewership. So I think they'll find someone. And then, of course, the other challenge that everyone's facing right now is COVID and just the unknown timeline on that. I do have intel from one Kevin Hodder that the race course down in Patagonia is, I think the number was 70% planned out. So, they're pretty close to being ready to pull the trigger if and when the chips fall in the right places. So hopefully that's sometime, I think, if my opinion, I feel like spring 2022 might be a nice timeline for that, and maybe a realistic timeline as well. But yeah, we'll have to see.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to jump into some of the questions that were sent in before. What do you consider the most important qualities to become a successful adventure racer to enjoy the experience? And to enjoy the experience. So best qualities for adventure racing.
Go for it, Scotty.
Yeah, I would say as much as you can strip your ego out of it, and ego is counterproductive. Ego leads to bad things in an adventure race, I would say. So, check. Everyone has one, but as much as you can check that at the door and leave it behind, and be constantly thinking beyond yourself and how you can make your team achieve its goals. One thing I always speak to as well is being honesty is really, really important going into a race. Being honest with yourself and honest with your teammates, what your goals are and what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are. And it's very easy to say certain things, but not truly believe them or be ready to act on them when things get tough out on the race course.
Bob, I've got a technical question here from Emil in Hamilton. What criteria checklist do you use to determine navigational choices? So, for example, going a long way around on a trail versus straight through, going high for visibility versus going low. Do you kind of balance those approaches at all?
A lot of it's by feel now that I have so much experience, which doesn't help people starting out. But the general rule with the trail versus bushwhack was 2-to-1. The speed you'll travel on the trail is at least 2 times faster than what you're going to go through the bush. So if the trail's more than twice as far as the bushwhack, it's kind of a toss-up at that point. But the caveat there is if it's in the dark, you really slow down bushwhacking in the dark and you move at a similar pace on the trail. So it almost goes to 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 on trail versus bushwhack, which is pretty applicable to Ontario. As far as the over the hill or around, it totally depends on the size and then what you're getting in the valley, because often valleys can have thicker vegetation than what you'll find on peaks and ridges. So it's kind of a tricky one. It's very terrain dependent.
Quick things from Kevin Hodder saying eco, which I think Scott mentioned, 100% design, 70% tested, poised and ready, good to go. Let's see, a few questions on sleep, dealing with sleep, and maybe Bob, maybe Scott, you can handle just physical sleep. And Bob, how do you navigate when you're exhausted?
I can go first on physical sleep. We definitely, sleep is a huge part of the strategy for these races. And, I'm still, after having raced for so long, I'm always blown away at how much faster you move after a little bit of sleep. As a general rule, I would say we get, on average between 2 or 3 hours per day of racing. But that's chunked up in different ways. I would say we usually go for 36 to 48 right off the bat without getting any sleep, and then we'll take a good block. Eco Challenge worked a little bit differently too, in that you had to take these sleep. You had to get 5 sleep cards punched. But yeah, I would say in general, one, don't sleep until everyone's ready to. There's nothing worse than pushing through and having 2 out of 4 of your teammates sitting up, not sleeping when everyone's stopped. So I would say try and push as far as you can until everyone's ready to sleep. And then make sure you're banking some sleep early in the race, and then those last day, a couple of days are really just taking little cat naps to get you through to the finish line.
Yeah, and it really depends how long the race is. I think you can get by on that strategy Scott described, where no sleep on the first night and then 2 to 3 hours kind of for the rest of the race. But that'll only get you into the 4th or 5th day, maybe the 6th day. But if the event's going longer than 6 days, you're going to need more sleep than that. So you'll probably have to take some bigger chunks in the 4 to 5 or 6 hour range if the race is getting a lot longer. And as far as navigation goes, that's when I start to crumble. Once we get over 5 days and, we're going on the amount of sleep that Scott described, it's really when I start to make more navigation mistakes. And we experienced that on the last paddle. We were all quite sleep deprived. We had a funny scenario where we actually only slept half an hour on the 5th night because we were trying to get out of those canyons and find trails, and we just wasted all the time we would have been sleeping. So we took a half hour on the 5th night, and then we're at the start of the paddle on the 6th night, and it was 9 o'clock at night, and there was 36 to 40K of paddling left. So we knew we were going to have to push through. And that normally would have only taken us, 5 or 6 hours, but we were in such a poor state mentally from sleep deprivation. It ended up taking us, I think, 9 hours. And part of that was a navigation mistake where we had picked an island that we were on our bearing for, and it ended up being, it was probably 30K we paddled out into the ocean, and it was off just a few degrees, and we ended up a couple kilometers north of the island we wanted to be on. So then we corrected and tried to start paddling for this island, where of course we're right into a massive headwind. It was just so we came really close to losing second place because of that mistake late in the race. So yeah, sleep deprivation in navigation late in races is really hard.
Yeah, it's the nature of navigating that all the mistakes count, no matter when in the race. I've think so many orienteering races in which I would have been clean until, say, the second last checkpoint, and
Oh,
You can
yeah.
toss the whole thing out the window. I think we're coming up, just checking to see any more questions there. We had sleep, a few questions on your feet. We had, let's see, any books or shows other than watching old versions of Eco? And actually, around TV, Bob, understand that you were you both put on the spot that you had to do the TV interviews during that as well. And how did you get the energy up for being charming on camera in and around racing as well?
So I didn't get pulled aside to talk very much, but I can answer the question. And that
Sure.
when you came into these transition areas during Eco, you had a 90-minute stop where you had to stop for. And part of the strategy there was that it allowed the TV crews to come in and pull your teammates out one at a time or whatever for a quick 10-minute interview without interfering with getting you out of the transition area more quickly. So if you knew you had to be there for 90 minutes, it wasn't a big deal anyways. So there was that. There wasn't, you definitely still didn't want to be pulled aside because there were other things to fill that 90 minutes with, for sure. But that's how the race organizers kind of got around that, to encourage people to be a little more willing to talk to the TV crews. As far as being charming on camera, maybe I can let Bobby speak to that one.
Yeah, right. 90 minutes sounds like a lot of time, but it's a blur when you're trying to get through those camps in a hurry. I hardly remember the interviews, to be honest. It's just like,
I know you guys have said great things about Wayne and his food prep and just looking after you guys there.
oh yeah, we were very lucky to have Wayne on the team. Like, he was probably the most dedicated TAC member there, where he was just like all focused on the team. He wasn't going for hikes or seeing the sights and taking things in. It was always, where's the team? What can I be doing to get them prepared for the next leg? It was awesome.
It was pretty awesome. His excitement with us coming into TAs was pretty infectious, especially as we started to pull up through the top ranks, for sure.
We saw a lot of shall we say veteran teams in Fiji. Do you think with hopefully renewed interest in adventure racing again, we'll start seeing a new generation of guys who will be guys and women especially all set to challenge your generation of racers?
I hope so. It would be really good to see a lot of younger teams coming out, and I think we are seeing it. I was looking at the teams registered for Wilderness Traverse so far, and I think maybe half are new teams. It's actually pretty amazing. So it has a huge impact, this event, on our sport. So yeah, it's really cool. And you're right. Like we need more younger, new blood coming up to start challenging some of the veterans, for sure.
And one last thing, if some of these races like Wilderness Traverse sell out, or if people want to kind of experience adventure race, I know one person said that volunteering at some of these races can be a great experience to really get to know the sport. Is that something you'd recommend?
Oh, absolutely. I think both Scott and I have volunteered at lots of races over the years, and you're guaranteed to meet some like-minded people if you can't find them amongst your close friends to go out and try one of these things. So yeah, definitely a great first step or introduction for people that can't find teammates.
Excellent. How are you spending the winter training? And then I'll throw it back to Patrick or Emma.
I'm loving my new terrain up here. As I said, I've only been up in Collingwood for a couple of months, and before I moved up here, I would have said I had a pretty good idea of the terrain around here, but I feel like every time I get out for a run, I just find a new dirt trail that links two awesome areas together. And of course, I think anyways, the snow conditions up here are just phenomenal this year. There's just been tons and tons of snow. So, I go for, I look back at my run pacing down in Burlington, and my pacing's down in the 4-minute range per kilometer. And I come up here and all my runs are like 8, 9, 10 minutes per kilometer. So I'm just off, running through the bush, and at times just finding, waist deep snow to plow through. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Getting on my bike trainer every once in a while when I have to, but other than that, getting out on my feet and my skis outside.
Excellent. And Bob?
Pretty much all classic skiing for me this
Really?
winter. Yeah, where we moved, we can ski right out our door, and the snow has just been so good. It's just been such a fun winter for me for classic skiing. So that's all I've been doing. Literally all I've been doing.
I'm sitting here in downtown Toronto. I'm very jealous of both of that. So with that, I'll throw it back to either Patrick or Emma. One of you guys take over.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'll do one quick, fun question to end it off. I had a funny question about, this is a 2-part question. Favorite food item, like you have to have this thing when doing a long race. Like you look forward to opening it once you start and put it in your bag.
What do you think, Scotty? I love peanut butter cups. I'm always looking forward to a peanut butter cup.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with something that has some high chocolate content as well. Peanut butter cups are good. But to be completely honest with you, you get sick of everything.
That was the second part of the question. It was what food item can you like no longer eat because of bad memories from adventure races?
That's energy gels for sure.
Yeah, every energy bar and gel ever made.
They get tiring. All right, well, thank you guys. For those of you who don't know, I'm Emma. Just wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to lead such a great discussion this evening. It was so wonderful to hear all these insider stories. I'm sure everybody was itching to know more about, because we didn't get to see much of you guys on World's Toughest Race. Obviously, big thank you to Don't Get Lost and everyone else behind the scenes for making this happen, and obviously to Nevin for leading such a wonderful, wonderful discussion. If you joined later in the chat or into the webinar this evening, don't forget that you can save the chat, which we did have a lot of links and helpful information. So at the bottom of the chat, you can click the 3 dots and save that. Otherwise, we have this meeting recorded and we will be posting it so you can watch it again. And we will also try to send out a recap email with some resources in the next few days. For those of you in the Don't Get Lost area, kind of the Golden Horseshoe, Toronto area, take a look at our website. We do have some virtual races going on, like we mentioned. And if you are new to the sport, we do have navigation clinics. You can find information about that there. I will post the link. As well, the dates is currently to be determined for the clinic, but likely be in the spring, some virtual and some in-person stuff with whatever we can do. And we always just encourage you to get involved, check out some of the races and things that we mentioned earlier this evening, and we hope to see you whenever races are on again. So if there's any more questions, I think that's all we have for you guys tonight.
Excellent. Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for coming.